The Taliban think they're doing well, facilitating the evacuation of Afghans too terrified of them to stay in this country. These people have waited days to leave Taliban-held Kabul by getting beyond these containers into the UK compound that is the staging post for Britain's exit and for that of as many former Afghan employees and their families as possible. Conditions are grim, but everything is relative. 2 days ago, 7 people died in the melee. Now the misery here is much more organized. The Taliban commander in charge is senior, an emir in their hierarchy. He told me they were doing their best, making it up as they go along. He said they'd been busy fighting over the last 20 years and didn't have any experience when it came to crowd control. Would-be evacuees go through several filters. To reach this point, they had to convince the Taliban they have the right paperwork to flee. Then they wait to be called forward by an interpreter working with the British. And this is the passageway to salvation, a narrow corridor created by placing a container feet from the airport wall. At the end, 2 members of the parachute regiment are in charge of admissions. When they get through, the final gauntlet is a question and answer session and a look at the paperwork to see if asylum really has been granted and safe passage out of here is theirs. So this is the awful point where young members of our armed forces and soldiers from other Western nations have to make that dreadful decision, that choice between who can go and who can stay. Things may look calm, but it felt raw and visceral. These Afghans believe this selection process is about life and death. It's challenging work for our paras, not least because of the close proximity of an enemy some fought in Helmand, losing comrades along the way. Who and what we were able to film, who we were able to speak to, required Taliban approval. The Afghans granted safe passage were leaving all that behind. They would soon be boarding one of these giant military transports to take them anywhere but here. The tempo of flights picked up today as the world answered the call. The British and the Americans, Italians, Canadians, Germans, Hungarians, Australians and New Zealanders were among those we watched, taking people to the freedom guaranteed beyond. The threat of ground fire meant some of the planes were doing nosedive landings and then taking off, standing on their tails as they made steep climbs to the safety of altitude. The combat maneuvers that some of the pilots are using to get in and out of here are known in the business as K-SANS, after the infamous siege during the Vietnam War. The White House doesn't like Vietnam analogies for obvious reasons, but as was the case in Saigon, the Americans will inevitably leave friends behind here, and so will the British. As we left the entrance to the UK's last post in this country, many Afghans continue to wait in the hope of reaching it, despite the indignity and hardship of doing so. John Irvine, ITV News, Kabul.